were supposedly launched from Iran into Israel. And we have some coverage on that. I saw that both of the candidates were getting off their planes earlier. It was earlier reported here today on the Crusade Radio Network. We talked about this morning that Tim Walz, in his debate practices, thought that he was getting beat so bad and that he just could not prepare adequately for tonight that he was actually considering, hey, why don't we just do a fundraiser for the victims of Hurricane Helen or Helene and not do the debate? We really don't need to do it anyway. And supposedly Walz was getting nervous and was trying to get out of it. And it was also said that Walz has been telling and told Harris before she picked him, look, I don't do debates well. I just don't do it. Which was kind of funny to me. Richard Barrett, let me bring Mr. You know what? Hang on a second, Richard. I have to configure the StreamYard stream. Hang on just a second. It was kind of funny to me because one of the first things that Walz said when he was chosen by Harris and they had that big hoop-de-doo rollout in Philadelphia is when he came on the stage and then she introduced him. And, of course, almost everything she said about him turned out to be untrue, turned out to be a lie. He bravely led men into combat and all this other stuff. We're not going to go over all that tonight. I'm sure J.D. Vance, if it comes up, will bring it up. But Tim Walz said something of J.D. Vance, I can't wait to debate that guy. Richard Barrett? Seems
yes,
like
sir.
Tonight he will get the chance to debate that guy. How are you, sir?
I'm excellent, sir. Always great to be here with more political coverage, best political coverage out there. And it's going to be interesting because it is an important, much like the vice presidential position, it is a very important debate, but yet it is not a very important debate. Simply because we've seen that the two contenders, Trump and Kamala, go at it in a very weird helter-skelter first debate. Now we're going to go back to a traditional format. Mics aren't going to be cut. And it's going to be interesting to see where policy and substance, where J.D. Vance shines. He's been on, I think, 50 news programs or some. He's had the most television appearances outside of everybody, including Trump. He goes on the Sunday shows regularly, so he's not. He won't shrink in the moment if he gets a little bit of pressure, as opposed to somebody like Walz, who is the embodiment of an emotional debater.
He's Chris Farley.
He is. He's essentially. Well, don't ever desecrate. Don't desecrate.
I'm sorry.
The name
My
of Chris
apologies to the Farley family. I
mean, come
sorry.
On, that's great. Yeah, it's. But yes, I know exactly what you're saying. He is all over the place, and so it's going to be interesting to see for our people who are.
Lloyd Vance was a senator from Texas. Dan Quayle was a very young senator from Indiana. And a question came up about age and experience. And Quayle said, well, you know, I'm actually the same age that Jack Kennedy was, John F. Kennedy was, when he first ran for the presidency. So I don't think that that age should be an issue here. And then Lloyd Benson, ever the crafty old Texan statesman, turned to Dan Quayle. This is a very famous line. I'm sure you've heard it. Turns to Dan Quayle and says, Senator, I knew Jack Kennedy. You, sir, are no Jack Kennedy. And that was pretty much the highlight of the Quayle-Benson debate. It didn't matter. Lloyd Benson probably, by most measures, dusted Quayle, but ultimately Michael Dukakis was such a terrible, horrible candidate, it didn't matter, and Dukakis sank the whole thing. By the time he was rolling down the street in Massachusetts, wherever it was, in the tank, and and by the time the Willie Horton scandal was known, and that was the furlough program in Massachusetts that Dukakis had signed as governor. By the time the Willie Horton and when this one convict was let out, Willie Horton on a weekend furlough, just what leftards do. They apologize for people's crimes, and other people get raped and die. And what happened was Willie Horton happened upon or broke into the home of a husband and wife, and he killed the husband and he raped the wife. And of course, once that got, the interesting thing about that is that it was Al Gore that actually brought that up in a debate with Dukakis, because Al Gore wanted to, Al Gore was Biden before Biden was cool. Al Gore ran and lost in '88. And then he ran again and was going to lose in '92 until Bill Clinton bailed him out and made him his vice president. So I don't put an awful lot of stock in this. You also remember there's some banana splits along the way, if you will. Remember the Saturday morning character series on, I forget which network it was, the banana splits. You had you had Rear Admiral James Stockton. In 1992, was chosen by H. Ross Perot. Now, Larry, I don't want the job, Larry, but if the American people want me to do it, I'll do the job, Larry. I don't want it. So Perot was going to run, and he does run on the independent party ticket, and he has to have a Veep. So he picks this guy, James Stockton, and they have a Veep debate, right? So it's Al Gore. And it's Al Gore, it's Quayle, and it's Stockton. And Stockton shows up in his Admiral uniform. He shows up in his Navy blacks. And he either did not want to or could not answer or would not answer any questions. It was like, I don't remember the exact verbiage, but it didn't really hurt the Perot campaign. I think that we have these for the networks and for us. It's political theater and it's entertainment. I don't think it sways anybody's vote one way or the other. But you know what, Richard? Actually, it should. You're one bullet away from being commander in chief.
Well, in Trump's case, literally. I mean, with Trump, we've seen it twice now. There's been two separate attempts on that we know of, and then of course there's the everything else. So the choice of J.D. Vance is even more of a calming influence. You're correct, sir.
I think, though, that tonight actually is the chance for J.D. Vance to really put some of his critics, put them out of their misery. I think he's probably the smartest guy that has entered politics in the last 50 years. I also think he has a very underappreciated sense of humor. He's a very humble guy. Did you see the scene that unfolded at that restaurant in Pennsylvania on Saturday?
Classic example of how JD is a very good, for being a young politician, he's a very good one, and couldn't have played it better. And yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. The same place that hosted Kamala a couple weeks earlier.
And so Vance is going to show up, and they called in advance. They called. They said we're coming, and they told people, they sent an email out. So a bunch of people, a bunch of supporters were there, and had already sat down and ordered drinks and had ordered meals and stuff. And at the last minute, the people that own the restaurant go like, "Yeah, I don't think we want him here." Or how Vance was very gracious and said, "You know what? She got a little nervous. Give her a break. Don't not go to her restaurant." He was very, very gracious, and I thought it was funny. I went in and I paid the bill, and I gave him a very large tip. And of course, I told him after I gave him the tip, vote for president, vote Trump, Vance, because you'll get no tax on tips. And he kind of handled it with a joke and with a policy statement at the same time. Just between me and you and our Catholic listeners out there, tonight's kind of it's a big night. It's a big night for me. I think it should be a big night for all people that are Catholics. Not that we should stand out and that we shouldn't assimilate or anything of the sort. But JD is a convert, and he has been beaten up by an awful lot of people. Either he's not Catholic enough, not conservative enough, or he's too Catholic and he's too conservative, and we don't want anyone like that anywhere near power. So I think it's a great opportunity tonight for Vance. I actually kind of hope, Richard, it's two moderators and Walz versus Vance. Because, America loves an underdog. We all thought that the night of the Kamala Trump debate that Trump got creamed. But we were watching it with pundit eyes. The public didn't think that. The people that were watching it at home did not agree with us. If anything, they were livid over the way the ABC moderators just kept, interrupting and fact-checking Trump, and obviously trying to sway the thing for Harris. And I kept saying to Maggie during the course, to our producer during the course of the debate, is this look of hers, this look of just utter hatred and scorn and mocking him at every question and everything he says, is this a good look? And it turns out that it wasn't. It wasn't a good look. So I think that I may watch this one I'll try to watch it with Publius eyes tonight and with pundits' eyes or the people's eyes instead of pundits' eyes. But at the end of the day, I don't really think that it matters a hill of beans. And right now, if you had to call it, I call it right now, this is Trump's to lose. I do not believe the polls that are coming out. I follow Scott Rasmussen. Rasmussen has had one day in the last 30 days where Harris was either tied or within 1 point. One day. She's outside the margin of error, which in a Rasmussen poll is 3.9%. Is what he says, 3.9%. Even though his rate of gauging actual elections, he's within 3%. He gets within 3%. He's the second most accurate pollster in the last 20 years. Rasmussen has Trump up, steadily climbing, going towards the 50% mark. Kamala has not moved that needle. She's fallen down to 40 on some days. This, to me, is Trump's race to lose, which is why I completely and totally expect an October surprise. And I don't know what it is, but I completely and totally expect. I don't know. Did they have another piece of videotape of Trump talking about grabbing women?
I don't think the October surprise will have anything to do with Trump. And going back to the debate, I didn't think he got creamed. I was one of the few that actually said, "I think."
You know what? You're right. Kudos to you. You're right.
I played the Trump apologist that night. That was my y'all forced me into that position. But looking back on it, it was a good call. But to answer your question, first of all, I don't think it's going to have anything to do with him. I think it's going to be something to do with putting Harris in the draft. I'm going to stick with the fact that I think they're going to find a way to because the more Joe gets just absolutely belligerent with the fellow Democrats and he's not out there and you've heard him say, well, I gave Kamala all the decisions. She did everything and she was the last one in the room. He's also torpedoing her campaign. I could see in the next 25 days them dropping him, putting her in as the 47th president and trying to run on the campaign of, well, we can't let a woman, we have to continue this momentum, some kind of thing like that. continue the history or somewhat of something in that nature. I don't think they have anything on Trump at this point. The guy's Teflon, and I believe he is steamrolling with this. The response in Appalachia was absolutely terrible, and
still
once again,
is.
Trump still is. Yeah, with the initial response and all of that, like you said, is terrible. And the fact that they still haven't done anything. Biden refuses to do anything. Kamala can't even make a heartfelt statement without reading off a script, which is never a good look for her. And so I think it's going to be installing her as the 47th president and trying to milk that historical surge, that honeymoon period you'll get for a couple weeks, to try and ride that into a November win. But I don't think there's anything that they can do to Trump. I mean, they shot him once. They tried to shoot him again, and they've done everything else to him. So they can't attack him. They have to do something to position Kamala as a more likable person. It's funny, they've attacked Trump for being unlikable and divisive, but Kamala is actually more unlikable. Think about this, Mike. They actually will not put her in a room with victims right now of the tragedy in Appalachia because they're afraid she's going to laugh at them, because that's what she does in her nervous cackle, and it's just going to come off as unlikable, and it's going to absolutely destroy whatever credibility she has left. She's not built for the moment. You have to be a complete and total narcissist psycho to begin with to want to be president. And you know, that's no offense to Trump. It's just you have to have a screw loose to want to be in that position. And Kamala didn't do it in 2020. She folded, and she's folding in real time as we speak, because, and it's not, in some ways, I don't even feel bad for her, because not in most 99.9% of people are not built for that job. That's why I have a primary process, which would have weeded her out in this cycle if she tried to. But most people are not built for this job, and we're seeing somebody wilt underneath it in real time. And so I don't think it's anything against Trump. Long answer to a short question. I don't think there's anything against Trump. I think they need to do things to reinvent her once again. They've reinvented her 3 or 4 times in the span of this 40-day, 50-day sprint, and they're going to try, I think, one more time.
Yeah, the third, fourth time, fifth time's the charm. I had not considered making her the first female president as an October surprise. I was thinking more along the lines of, if you're following this ILA strike, this International Longshoremen Association strike, that's going to shut everything down. And you know what? I don't know if you saw it tonight. They sent reporters out. They're out at Costco's. They're out at Sam's. And you know what they're seeing? Lines and people with buggies stacked up 15 people deep with 5, 6, 8 ginormous 24 packs of toilet paper again. Here we go again with the supply chain interruption. It's 2020 all over again. You remember the hoarding?
Yep.
Well,
yeah.
Well, the same people that panicked and hoarded for the lockdowns are now doing the same thing, thinking that the longshoreman strike is going to do the same thing to the supply chain, and they're going to run out of toilet paper, and they're going to run out of the various other necessities. So the lines at the big lot retailers are long. And the people are hoarding things that, and we haven't seen this. I don't think I ever actually saw this in my entire adult lifetime until 2020. And I remember standing online at a little tiny Piggly Wiggly down the street from my house, and there was a woman standing in front of me, and she had 2 carts, and both carts were filled with 12 and 24 pack or cases of toilet paper. And I'm standing, and this was in April. And I'm standing here going what in the hell? Did I just wake up in the Twilight Zone? And there was another guy. It was her, then it was me, it was someone else. So the panic has already set in. And I think that one of the scenarios that I was thinking was that, okay, well, they can do this. And because you got this guy out there that is the president of the Longshoremen's, or the Longshoremen Union, Harold Daggett. And you probably have all seen Harold Daggett out there saying that, my guys didn't bail on you during COVID. They got sick and they died and this and that and the other. And we're going to have to, and we're due this. This is owed to us. They're going to have to pay us. You might as well pay us now. We will, what did he say? Something about we will strike you, or we will cripple. You said we will cripple you. We will cripple you, and these other things. These things come off as a threat. You got people in Appalachia that don't have power, aren't going to have power, can't pretty much can't do anything, or have do not have the ability to do anything that they were doing previously that would be considered just normal and modern. And then you have these guys out there who are making $81,000 to $105,000 a year, saying that that's not enough. We want $143,000 a year, or we quit, and we're going to shut everything down and make your life miserable. And while people in Appalachia are going well, the stuff that's going to be coming into your port, we're going to need actually to rebuild and to repair. Can you not do that now? So I think the timing of this is absolutely terrible. This this guy that is the union leader, this Harold Daggett guy, has been in a lot of trouble before, and he just comes off to me like he's a gangster. Gangster / mobster, whatever you want to call him. And it just seems to me that this is theatrical, and that they're building this guy up and this whole thing, that this is the worst thing that could possibly happen at the worst time. And then we're going to have Lady Kamala ride in on her white horse with her negotiating tools. And she is going to, she was a prosecutor at one time, Richard. She is going to ride in on the proverbial white horse, and she is going to save the day and get the ILA to sit down with the other guys, with the shippers and all that, and to talk this whole thing out. So I think that was one example of the October surprise. And the other example of the October surprise began today. There's a war going on. Now, the Biden regime was quick to get out there and go like, hey, if you help the Israelis shoot down incoming ICBMs or ballistic missiles or whatever they're calling them. Now, I saw a video. I can't swear and tell you that it was from today. They said it was from today. It was shot inside Israel. And it was a bunch of young people that had found the remains of what looked to me to be some sort of a ballistic missile. Now they're going over there and they picked it.
Would hurt her. Now within the context of it being a global war and all that stuff. Remember, these people on the left are so crazy; they'd rather watch the whole thing burn down than have any kind of actual peace settlement. So I know exactly what you're talking about, Mike. And in any other year that's not, any other year before 2020, where apparently we entered a parallel universe, that would have been completely fine. And that would have been the October surprise. But they got so many crazy Gen Zs and millennials that hate Israel that would actually hurt her, in my, very humble opinion.
Well, the interesting thing is that the original October surprise was a farce. It never happened. George W. Bush did not fly to Iran with a deal with a letter from Ronald Reagan and hand it to the Ayatollah to obtain the release of the hostages, or to say that they were going to be released if Reagan was going to be elected. That's not the way it happened. Watch the Ben Affleck movie about how the Iranian hostages actually got out.
That's a great movie, by the way.
Yeah, and you watch that movie.
Great movie.
Argo. Nothing to do with that movie. Completely destroys the original October surprise. I mean, he just eviscerates it. So there never has been an October surprise. Maybe in 2016 they had, the Trump grab him by the what, but that's the extent of it. I just don't think that they have. And I was talking with Magdalene about this today. Is there buyer's remorse in the Democrat Party over making the choice of getting rid of Joe and then coronating Kamala without any sort of a competition whatsoever? Talk about not vetting Tim Walz. Kamala Harris was never vetted. There's no way this woman in a straight-up contest is going to pull into double digits nationwide. She had the lowest approval rating of any vice president in history. She's eminently unlikable. By the way, this is something still to this day that has not been settled. I don't know if you've seen this guy. His name is, oh God, I have to go back to my Twitter because I've only mentioned his name twice and I didn't commit it to memory. But it's Peter something. He used to work in the Justice Department he was an attorney in the Justice Department of the Bush administration. And when Obama was elected, he went back into private practice. He has been trying to find, she loves to say she's a prosecutor.
Yes, from a middle-class family.
Well, I was the prosecutor from a middle-class family, and I prosecuted international drug cartels, okay? He can't find a single transcript from a single case where when she was the DA of San Francisco or the Attorney General of California that she ever actually prosecuted a case in court.
It's the same thing as the French fries from McDonald's. It's all lies. It's all things that are fabricated to try and build up some kind of resume for her. And it's one thing you just said it before. She was the first to bail out in 2020. She was literally handed this job. And yes, I think there is buyer's remorse for her. I think there's buyer's remorse for Tim Walz because she's come out and said that the day she picked him, she was really tired. And that's, she hadn't been getting a lot of sleep when she made the Walz pick. And I think the reason why Walz was picked is because everybody else looked at her and said, no, even guys like Pete Buttigieg was like, no, I'm not coming anywhere near this. And when everybody was like, oh, it's Gavin Newsom, it's all these front runners, it's going to be the psycho up in Michigan. I'm like, nobody is coming within 1,000 feet of this campaign because this is a kamikaze run. And whoever's going to be put in this position is going to get thumped. And they're just going to clear the deck because the Democrats play the long game. They'll take the loss in 2024 and they'll come back in 2028 because that's what they do. They don't care about Kamala getting thumped. In fact, this is probably, that's what she signed up for.
Well, I want to play you this clip. Happened on OMSNBC earlier today, and then we'll go to Magdalene Rose. We'll bring Magdalene Rose in on this conversation. This guy's name, yeah, it's in Signal. This guy, his name is Glaude. Eddie Glaude. Okay. The dude actually is about to have a meltdown on OMSNBC air because he doesn't think people are going hard enough after Trump. Now, this is after the tone down the rhetoric. You're basically going to hear this guy say, look, someone has got to take this Trump guy out. And then at the end, he calls him a name. I'm going to let you wait to the end to hear what he calls Trump.
Donald Trump got in 2020. So it took historic numbers to beat him, right? And so now we get enamored with the Dick Cheneys and the Liz Cheneys and the Flakes and the da-da-da-da, right? And this man is running around here busting his chops, scaring the hell out of communities, right? And we're trying to figure out how to keep that middle, locked in on her when she needs to bust him in his mouth. I'm saying it like that.
Bust him in his mouth?
He's dangerous. He's dangerous to particular people.
Again,
and the history of the country
go out
is such
kill him
that
again.
We can't play fast and loose with it. Isn't
it incumbent on all of us to protect the people who are in danger by him?
But you never have. That's the rub. You never have. And so part of what we have to do in the midst of this is to engage in a deep-seated political calculus, right? Even though we know that she has to get the middle, we got to come out and try to figure out how to turn out in large historic numbers, because we got to keep this troglodyte out of office. Because if he comes in, our babies are going to be in danger. Because remember, those young children are going to grow up with the memory of having to not go to school for the threat of bombs. And somebody told them that.
He called him a troglodyte. You heard the rhetoric, though. We need to beat this. This guy needs to be physically beaten. Folks, they are losing it. You know, the amazing thing to me is just watch what the leftards say. Just listen to their rhetoric. They always tell you who they are and what they want to do by projecting it on to their enemy. This is just classic demonic warfare here. You take what it is that you want to do, and then you cast it upon your enemy and say that they want to do it. And that really is all that they have left here now. Their candidate is a disaster. You know, Magdalene Rose is on the Dude Maker hotline. Magdalene, good evening to you.
Good evening.
We were talking earlier today about just what kind of the optics of the last couple of days here. You had presidential moments that were in the making. Now, no one wants to say that a natural disaster, a hurricane, or if it was just a mudslide or an earthquake, whatever. No one wants to say that we're glad that situation came along so we could prove that our guy was presidential and their gal wasn't. Nobody wants to say that. I'm not going to say that. But at the end of the day, that's what happened. You had people acting as though Donald John Trump of Mar-a-Lago is president of the United States. They're showing up to hear him speak. They're respectfully asking him for their help, for his help. He's even going on. I don't think he should have started a GoFundMe. He should have let somebody else start a GoFundMe. He should have endorsed it, or is in some way involved in starting a GoFundMe. He goes to the actual site. He doesn't, with his own money, he goes and he buys goods and he brings gasoline, and he's in touch with Elon, and he's doing things that, and people are looking to him like he is the actual president. Biden is asleep on a beach. Biden's asleep on a beach. And Harris is at a fundraiser where some dumbass tweeted out the menu this morning, or yesterday, tweeted out what she was eating while the people of Appalachia were sitting there fighting literally for their lives here. And this is the woman that wants to lead them and be president. So I don't even know why we're having the conversation anymore. Let's just get this over with, get rid of Biden and Harris, and try and make America hell. Try and save America.
I think that's true, and I think the reason why Kamala Harris doesn't care is because the people suffering are in many ways the J.D. Vances of America. They tend to be white. They tend to be in areas she can't win politically, so why would she care?
That's right.
And that's really the difference here. This is the same thing with whenever there is a chemical explosion or anything. We've seen this in the past. We've seen them do this. And I think J.D. Vance, if he doesn't bring that up tonight, he's an idiot. If he doesn't say these people are leaving part of America to rot, then he does not deserve to be on that stage. Because in a lot of ways in the last debate, Trump left a lot of things that he could have set out. So if he can bring that up this time, he can hammer Walz. I mean, Joe Biden is just in complete abdication of his responsibility as president. So if he can bring that out, he'll be able to score points for Trump and also further cement North Carolina for Trump, because North Carolina is always within a point or so. If Vance can secure North Carolina for Trump tonight, he will have done his job.
Yeah, I think that's correct. And I think that, J.D. Vance wrote the book Hillbilly Elegy. These actually are his people. Someone on OMSNBC was trying to, but he never really was one of them. He went to Harvard and he was a Rhodes Scholar and that and the other. No, he actually, read the book. He actually was. He talked about it in his in one of the interviews where somebody was mocking him. He said, well, you know what? I'm thankful for my mamaw. My mamaw, he called it his grandmother, his mamaw. Only we Hicks and Hayseeds in the South are allowed to say mamaw. Yankees don't say mamaw. They say granny or something. Only we say mamaw or mamaw or something. I have a mamaw. Maggie has a mamaw. Vance actually did come from hillbillies. That's why the book's called Hillbilly Elegy. These were his people. His mother was literally a crack whore. I mean, I'm not trying to be disrespectful or vulgar, but she literally was. And that's how so many young men of his era grew up. Watch the TV series if you can stomach it. Don't watch the whole thing, but you can get the gist of it. Watch the TV series Honey Boo Boo. J.D. Vance is from the Honey Boo Boo generation, and he grew up poor. It's a true story. I don't know why Vance's story is as an underdog and as someone that actually did pull himself up by the proverbial bootstraps. Why that's not hasn't caught on, but I think that it will. And you know what? I hadn't thought about that if he secures North Carolina tonight. You know what else is happening out there in North Carolina? Mark Robinson is taking his cues from Trump. Robinson is I saw it today. He's driving around in his own pickup truck. He's stopping by wherever he can go. He's getting cases and cases of water and other supplies. And he's actually going out and saying, I really want to be your governor. I'll be a good leader. And this is my moment here. Mark Robinson is actually doing the things that I don't know what Roy Cooper is doing because I haven't been following it that closely, but I did see that Mark Robinson was doing it. So I think that you have a confluence of events here. And the people that have great disdain for MAGA people who are largely Southern, largely white, and largely middle class to middle poor, that's who got hit by Hurricane Helene. And you know what? Donald Trump didn't ask anyone for a tax return when he went and said, I'm here for you guys. I've talked to Elon. We've got the gas coming, and like we played the clip earlier today, Macklin. You and I listened to it, where he said, we're going to stick together. We're going to put politics aside. We're one family. We're one people, and we're going to help each other rebuild. That's what presidents say.
Yeah, it is. And why are Donald Trump and Elon Musk trying to help the people of North Carolina and Joe Biden isn't? Why does it seem more and more like Trump and Elon are running the United States? We've never before had an absentee president like with Biden. We've had presidents who their lack of ability was hidden, but someone was still running the country, even if they were running it poorly. Who is running the country? Because it's not Kamala Harris, it's not Biden, it's not even Jill Biden. She's off to that fashion events in New York now. So who's running the country? And that's why more and more we see things like Elon saying, well, I have the satellites set up, and Trump is coordinating ground support, and DeSantis is sending National Guard surplus members in Florida to states that are in need. Are those people running the country? Because if that's the case, then Democrats should just bow out of this election. Because if they're giving over leadership of the country to this group of people, why are they then trying to get someone else elected on the ballot?
It's an amazing thing. Richard, let me bring Richard back in here. It's an amazing thing. I know you're a big Elon fan. You still got your Dogecoin?
Of course.
Okay.
I think it's like worth 12 cents now.
Okay,
so
this is an amazing thing here. Let's just say 10 states affected by Hurricane Helene, and Elon pledging support. And there's already 600 Starlink units that have been activated. I think we saw that earlier. There was a report on that earlier. More are coming. So Elon is trying to restore the communications and save the people, or at least assist in saving the people of 10 states. And as if that's not enough, a SpaceX capsule arrived at the International Space Station this afternoon, carrying a couple of SpaceX astronauts who are going to stay on the ISS and give their seats up, and are there to rescue the two astronauts that Boeing and Biden stranded on the International Space Station. So Elon Musk is saving Americans in 10 states and even in outer freaking space. How do you like that?
Well, I mean, if you had the choice, you'd probably go in a Starlink, or you'd probably go in a SpaceX rocket instead of a Boeing rocket anyway. Just based on Boeing's track record at this point.
Yes.
But yeah, Elon Musk is turning into a modern day Tony Stark at this. I mean,
isn't that funny? That's kind of cool. I didn't even think of that. Yeah, he is.
I mean, he's a billionaire that just kind of runs around and kind of does what he. I mean, yes, we can all acknowledge that he is the neurochip guy, and he's not perfect. No person walking the earth is, but he's a billionaire that does as much as he can for as many people in this situation. He doesn't have to spend one dime to do any of the things that he's being asked to do.
I wonder if he has an iron suit.
I bet you he does. He's got something. He's probably, even if it's just fake, he probably has one in one of his offices. He has to. But the fact of the matter is, yes, you are. I think Magdalene is 100% on point with the optics of this, and I think the fact that there's dysfunction coming out of DC, to bring it back to a previous point you made, Mike, is the fact that they rushed Biden out, thinking that maybe Kamala could inject some hope into this campaign after that. When they should have just had Biden just ride this thing out and just suffer through it. Because I said when they replaced Kamala, there's a sizable amount of the electorate that really likes Joe because he's been there for 100,000 years and he's a known product. Kamala wasn't. And to the side of that, Kamala, and Trump said this at the first debate, Biden hates Harris. So, of course, they're not going to be working together. He's going to sit on a beach because he's been tossed to the side. Why does he care about anything that's going on? Because he's been relegated to just even more of a figurehead. And as we've stated, we've gone round and round. She is not ready for this position. And I don't think anybody really notices that. Meanwhile, Trump has been around. Trump knows how to at least stand in front of a bunch of people. And really, what your people of the union want, when a state is devastated, they just want the leaders to come to the place and
just want to know that they're working at it, that they're on their side. Say,
we're here. We the whole country sees what you're going through. We're with you, and we're going to do everything we can.
Okay,
just that morale boost, and the fact that they can't do that right now just shows how much they've given up on these places. And it's crazy because they're all swing states, supposed swing states of Georgia and North Carolina. When this first happened, I thought they were going to try and make Kamala do a 2012 when Barack went to New Jersey and Chris Christie hugged him and they did all this other kind of stuff. I thought they were going to try and manufacture something like that. Mike, they probably tried and they said, you can't do this.
She can't do that.
They looked at her and she's like, you can't do this. So we're just going to have to take a picture with you signing some documents and just roll the B footage and we'll just try to get through this.
It's even worse than that. Welcoming all of you who are watching our coverage on the Crusade channel, live talking campaign radio the way it should be. I'm on here every weekday morning, 6 to 9 a.m. I hope you'll join me tomorrow morning for a recap. Richard Barrett fills in for me, and Magdalene Rose joins me pretty much every day with campaign reporting, plus our colleague Mike Parrott, and 2 shows from across the ocean, the Midday Show and Turley's Believe It or Else, round out our broadcasting day with Crusade Channel News. Thanks for watching. Can you make a donation tonight? There are donate buttons all over our chat rooms on YouTube. Click the dollar button at the bottom of the chat, and in the Crusader Stadium, welcoming all of you. Sorry I haven't popped in the chat room, but we have been kind of silently working some technical issues, which we now have sorted out and are ready to rock and roll for the debate. To that point, I want to go to a couple of points here. Number one, July the 13th, we were on air 6 minutes after President Trump was shot at by Thomas Matthew Cook. 6 minutes. It took us 6 minutes. We were on air. Richard joined me at about 10 minutes after, and Mike Parrott joined me at about 15 after, and Magdalene joined later in the day. And we were with you for 6 hours covering the aftermath of the assassination. On that day, the thing that was commonly said, or the thing that was on people's mind, is with that shot that missed today, Donald Trump just won the presidency again. And that because, he would win the sympathy vote, and this guy's willing to take an actual bullet for you, et cetera, et cetera. Then something happened, and the leftards did what they do, and they created another narrative fiction, and they plugged this princess, this alleged California princess, into the whole thing. And as you predicted, Richard, all of mediadom, all of Hollywood, all of mediadom, all of them poured every ounce of energy and money and supposed moxie and charisma into elevating Kamala into the superwoman who was going to save the Democrat Party, and she was going to save all of us from Trump. And but she never was that person. And I have been maintaining that she never was that person, and there's only so much that you can fake. She always has been a Manchurian candidate. It's not an accident that, some other researcher was looking at this saying that they can't even discover whether or not there is a marriage certificate between Professor Harris and Kamala's mother. Now, I never did that. I did the natural born citizen. She's not. She shouldn't be running. But I never do. And the point being that this woman has no ancestral tie to you and me. Her ancestral tie is to power. It's as simple as that. But I want to tell you, Richard Barrett, and our wonderful audience out there, and Magdalene Rose. Magdalene, I told this to you this morning, so you've already heard it. This is the moment I think Donald Trump won the presidency.
In a time like this, when a crisis hits, when our fellow citizens cry out in need, none of that matters. We're not talking about politics now. We have to all get together and get this solved. We need a lot of help. They have to have a lot of help down here. We look out for one another. We pull together. We pitch in. We persevere, and we pull it through. That is really the American spirit. That's what made America originally great. And that's why today I've come to... Well,
okay. Richard, that's the moment when he won the presidency, because he said President EE things. That's what people wanted to hear. It's just natural that you want to hear that. I don't care whose side you're on. So I think that the natural disaster here has just shown just how bad the Democrat Party of the United States, just how viscerally with their guts hates your average American, because your average and maybe even lower than middle-class American, they're still Americans, they still vote, still fellow citizens, are being treated as though look, we hear you and we know you have problems because the stupid hurricane took knocked your cable out and you're not able to watch wrestling and reruns of the Dukes of Hazzard. We understand that. We're going to try to get you something back on. But President Trump actually cares about that, doesn't play that game. And in that statement right there, you know what Harris did 4 hours later, Richard? She went to the FEMA headquarters, the Bureau in Washington, and gave a pep talk off of a teleprompter, basically notes in her hand, to bureaucrats. That's the day they lost. Now, I don't know, can they manufacture enough votes? Are they actually going to be able to get a bullet into his head twixt now and November the 5th? I don't know. I don't think that they can overcome this. I think, Magdalene, what has been done in the universities, especially in Arizona and Pennsylvania, you know, our colleague Don from the Bronx to Florida, Don is affiliated with Turning Point USA, TP USA, and what Charlie and TP USA have done in Arizona and have done in Pennsylvania, they have registered hundreds of thousands of young people on college campi across those two states as Republicans.
And that's a great thing, and I hope it matters. My concern is that as we get into this debate, Kamala Harris did a very good job last time of pushing Trump off of saying the things that really matter. I don't think J.D. Vance will be able to be pushed away from those things. And you mentioned, is there anything they could do to stop them right now? I don't think there is. I think at this point, Trump is on the path to victory. You see that in the polling across the states. And I just wonder how much longer it's going to take Democrats to realize, like you said, Kamala Harris is the worst choice possible. Barrett is right. People were comfortable with Joe Biden. They should have stuck with him.
Yeah, they were. Well, it's the devil that you knew versus,
yes,
and literally the devil that you don't know, who is. And if there was a fair broadcast media, this wouldn't even be close. She'd be back where she was in 2019. She'd be back in single digits or less than a percentage point, and would not be. This wouldn't even be a conversation piece. And by the way, as I have been saying for years now, the Democrats don't have a bench. Now, Richard, you were talking earlier about, the Democrats are going to, they'll wait, they'll buy their time to come back in 2028. They're going to have to manufacture some young talent because they don't have it. Hakeem Jeffries is not a national election figure. He just isn't. Who are they going to, Cory Booker? No. Who do they have? Gavin Newsom? Somebody said that Tim Walz is Gavin Newsom in a flannel shirt. I don't know which one of them is worse. Who do they have? This governor, the governor of Colorado. I don't know who they have that's on that's on their bench. But as I have been saying, and sometimes I'm right about these things. I think the Democrat Party is in the throes of what happened to the Federalist Party in the 1830s, and that is that it just went away. And it had won like three previous presidential elections, and that party went away. And you know what formed out of the smoldering remains of what was the Federalist Party or the Whig Party in 1836? The Democrat Party. Martin Van Buren, look it up. I think it's been around 150 years too long. We will see tonight. So the debate will begin in 2 minutes, and they will not cut the mics off. We will be chiming in when they take a break. Richard and I, and Magdalene can hang out, and we'll have full coverage here of the audio and the video for you. Any last comments, Mr. Barrett?
You're seeing the fact that people don't like Kamala and in regards Walz in the fact that there's no enthusiasm in early voting. There's a lot of enthusiasm, especially in places like Virginia, that we didn't see in 2020. That's also partially because Trump and Vance have embraced early voting. Secondly, as far as the bench is concerned, I don't think it really matters right now because they've got 4 years to conjure somebody up out of nothing. Because
True.
Remember, nobody knew who Barack Obama was in 2008. So I completely agree with you. I think Vance will be solid. We'll see how long Walz can hang on before he just completely goes the emotional track and just starts flailing. It'll be interesting to see how long that takes.
Well, you know, Walz is a very Biden-esque kind of guy on the campaign trail. There's no lie that he won't tell, and there's no amount of anger that he tells the lies with. I mean, he literally gets visibly frustrated. I mean, like it's life or death if he doesn't tell this whatever this tale is that he's going to tell. The problem for him tonight is this is a major problem. J.D. Vance has been tempered by fire. Okay, J.D. Vance has done 54 interviews. 54 interviews since he was nominated as vice president. Walz has done 3. 2 of them where he's holding hands with Kamala. 54 interviews with mostly hostile interviewees or interviewers is going to temper your sword. You know what's coming. You know what they're going to say. He's gotten really, really good at it. I think that he's gotten better at it. And then you combine that with the fact that J.D. Walz has a very good foundation. I always talk about foundation on my radio show and how important intellectual foundation is. Vance has a really good, very strong intellectual and philosophical foundation, and I think that will come through tonight. I don't think it's going to matter that the moderators are going to, if they gang up on him, and it's 2 moderators and Walz against Vance. I think Vance will relish the opportunity. And again, just don't make a colossal mistake. You don't make a colossal mistake, it's a win.
I completely agree.
And with that, we're just waiting on this thing to begin. And I guess we'll take the Fox News feed here as we kind of count the moments down. By the way, no official response yet from the Israelis, but the smart money and the people that I know that are kind of still in military and in touch with people that are in special ops and may know just a little bit more than your average American knows, were telling me that basically that the Israelis now have until October the 7th to do whatever the hell they want to do. That'll be the 1-year anniversary of the Hamas, of the attack, of, if you weren't there that day, of the hang gliders, of the super high-tech hang gliders and G.I. Joe fighting boats storming the beaches of Israel. So we will keep an eye on that. No one wants World War III, and let's pray that we don't get it here. It's Mike Church here on the Crusade Radio Network and the Crusade Radio Network on YouTube, on X.com, and on Rumble, and on our Roku channel tonight. Welcoming all of you to the vice presidential debate. We're going to take you live now to the debate, CBS News. And the candidates are on the stage, and we will rejoin you when there's a break.
Questions will be directed at one candidate who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points, with an additional 1 minute each at the discretion of the moderator. The primary role of the moderators is to facilitate the debate between the candidates, enforce the rules, and provide the candidates with the opportunity to fact-check claims made by each other.
CBS News reserves the right to mute the candidates' microphones to maintain decorum. We have not shared the questions or topics with the campaigns. The stage is set. Governor, Senator, thank you for joining us. Let's get started. Tonight, our country is facing several unfolding crises. The Middle East is on the brink of war. Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene, and now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed, thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war. Iran is weakened, but the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, and thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago, a nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment. But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person closest to them, Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together. Understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as the Vice President said today we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit, because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working-class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me, and she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, do you care to respond to any of the allegations?
Well, look, Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance it. Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles did fall near U.S. troops and they received traumatic brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off as headaches. Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance, the U.S. did have a diplomatic deal with Iran to temporarily pause parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about what the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. Nora?
Margaret, thank you. Let's turn now to Hurricane Helene. The storm could become one of the deadliest on record. More than 160 people are dead and hundreds more are missing. Scientists say climate change makes these hurricanes larger, stronger, and more deadly because of the historic rainfall. Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans and more than 60% of Republicans under the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane, because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today, actually, a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then, of course, afterwards, to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job, and I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. Now, Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America, because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane, and my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship. They work together. So all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover, but we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in. What we've seen out of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting, and this has allowed them to tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the solution for us is to continue to move forward, that climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across the country. That's exactly what this administration has done. We are seeing us becoming an energy superpower for the future, not just the current. And that's what absolutely makes sense. And then we start thinking about how do we mitigate these disasters.
Thank you. Senator, I want to give you an opportunity to respond there. The governor mentioned that President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly, Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats Democrats will use here. And I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership. And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially the components that go into those solar panels. So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production. We haven't built a nuclear facility, I think, one in the past 40 years.
Senator.
Natural gas, we got to invest more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also meant that we're doing
Senator,
worse by the climate.
your time is up. Governor, would you like to respond?
Well, look, we're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil. But the folks know, and like I said again, these are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our #1 export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. And thinking about how do we respond to that, we're thinking ahead on this. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure that we're protecting by burying our power lines? How do we make sure that we're protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of? But to call it a hoax and to take the oil company executives to Mar-a-Lago, say, give me money for my campaign, and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that, and an all-above energy policy is exactly what she's doing, creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. We're going to turn now to immigration. The crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border consistently ranks as one of the top issues for American voters. Senator Vance, your campaign is pledging to carry out the largest mass deportation plan in American history and to use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how this will work? For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil? You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country. I had a mother who struggled with opioid addiction and has gotten clean. I don't want people who are struggling with addiction to be deprived of their second chance because Kamala Harris let in fentanyl into our communities at record levels. So you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations. And that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret, is you ask about family separation. Right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. And I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that. It would be good for all of us.
Governor, do you care to respond to any of those specific allegations, including that the vice president is, quote, letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug mules, among other things regarding children?
the drug mule is not true, but I will say about this, about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history, 30% decrease in Ohio. But there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of the largest state and a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this, and that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents, detection for drugs, DOJ money to speed up these the adjudications on this, just what America wants. But as soon as I was getting ready to pass and actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no, told them to vote against it because it gives him a campaign issue. It gives him what would Donald Trump talk about if we actually did some of these things? And they need to be done by the legislature. You can't just do this through the executive branch. So look, we have the options to do this. Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall, and Mexico will pay for it. Less than 2% of that wall got built, and Mexico didn't pay a dime. But here we are again, 9 years after he came down that escalator, dehumanizing people and telling them what he was going to do. As far as the deportation plan, at one point, Senator Vance said it was so unworkable to be laughable. So that's where we're at. Pass the bill, she'll sign it.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, the question was, will you separate parents from their children, even if their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. And I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this country. And we know that they use children as drug mules, and it is a disgrace, and it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that. We had a record number of illegal crossings. We had a record number of fentanyl coming into our country. And now that she's running for president, or a few months before, she says that somehow she got religion and cared a lot about a piece of legislation. The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo 94 Donald Trump executive actions that opened the border. This problem is leading to massive problems in the United States of America. Parents who can't afford health care, schools that are overwhelmed. It's got to stop, and it will when Donald Trump is president again.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, what about our CBS News polling, which does show that a majority of Americans, more than 50%, support mass deportations?
Look, we fix this issue with a bill that is necessary, but the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this, and Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this, talking about and saying, I will create stories to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said, it's not true, don't do it. There's consequences for this. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Lankford did it. We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Tim,
Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the question first. The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding. So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive action, solve this. Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our borders are. Kamala Harris has been, and it's actually heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help, but most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed, you've got hospitals that are overwhelmed, you've got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim. And I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, well, it is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it. That's because they know we need to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up, of not dealing with it, of blaming migrants for everything. On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making them less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree, it should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles. I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded. It's supported by the people who do it. And it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status. Right. Temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn out of the economy. Thank you,
Margaret. The rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own leadership.
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process. Nora.
Thank you, Margaret. The economy is a top concern for voters. Each of your campaigns has released an economic plan, so let's talk about the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion. How would you pay for that without ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you in a house. A house is much more than just an asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational to where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the $35 insulin is a good thing, but it costs $5 to make insulin. They were charging $800 before this law went into effect. As far as the housing goes, I've seen it in Minnesota. 12% more houses in Minneapolis, prices went down on rent 4%. It's working. And then making sure tax cuts go to the middle class. $6,000 child tax credit, we have one in Minnesota, reduces childhood poverty by a third. We save money in the long run, and we do the right thing for families. And then getting businesses off the ground. The law as it stands right now is $5,000 tax credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you this. He kept it. He took folks to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm going to give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class. What happened there was an $8 trillion increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's proposing a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it, it would increase inflation and potentially lead to a recession. Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do, we'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that, our system works best, more people are participating in it, and folks have the things that they need.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly, the Wharton School has done an analysis of the Trump plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit by $5.8 trillion. My question is the same for you. How do you pay for all that without ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer, a lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do. And some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies. And what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%, open the American southern border and make middle-class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now. Not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust her actual plans. Now, Donald Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom. Because Donald Trump's economic policies delivered the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country, 1.5% inflation, and to boot, peace and security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers. Now, Tim admirably admits that they want to undo the Trump tax cuts. But if you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle-class and working-class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle class?
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one, whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, whatever, how is it fair that you're paying your taxes every year and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years, and the last year as president? That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. I mean, I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much, and I hope they're in bed right now. But look, so many of the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured by nations that hate us. This has to stop, and we're not going to stop it by listening to experts. We're going to stop it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator, your time is up. Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
Well, if you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record, 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics
that's a gross generalization.
that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here, because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you've simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on health care then.
Senator, Governor.
Please.
Thank you. Margaret?
We have a lot to get to ahead, gentlemen, on many topics. But right now, I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything, many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric. But being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID, and I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community, and then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Vance, in 2016, you called your running mate, Donald Trump, unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out to messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Thank you. Now to the issue of reproductive rights. Governor Walz, after Roe versus Wade was overturned, you signed a bill into law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duvall, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not where, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to make it more difficult, if not impossible, to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening, me included, infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody else's business, but those things are being proposed. And the catch-all on this is, well, the states will decide what's right for Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works. This is basic human right. We have seen maternal mortality skyrocket in Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world. This is about health care. In Minnesota, we are ranked first in health care for a reason. We trust women. We trust doctors.
Senator, do you want to respond to the governor's claim? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
No, Nora, certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And, you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And, you know, one of them is actually very dear to me. And I know she's watching tonight, and I love you. And she told me something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do. I want us as a Republican Party to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family. And I think there's so much that we can do on the public policy front just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions, let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse, and let's be honest, sometimes a very, very messy and divided country.
Governor, would you like to respond and also answer the question about restrictions?
Yeah, well, the question got asked and Donald Trump made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care. Amber Thurman died in that journey back and forth. The fact of the matter is, how can we as a nation say that your life and your rights, as basic as the right to control your own body, is determined on geography? There's a very real chance had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does not, and that's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that. He mentioned, it was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022 talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, you know, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making child care more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
Governor, your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things, to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit, but we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator.
May I respond to that? First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think, whether you're pro-choice or pro-abortion, that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given
But how?
I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business on this. Things worked best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't preclude us from increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health care. So the hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget, Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact-checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We have to move on, and we're going to be right back with much more of the CBS News vice presidential debate in just a moment.
The House will be in order.
This year, C-SPAN celebrated.
Well, I hope you are, I don't want to say enjoying, but being entertained by the dialogue tonight betwixt Governor Tim Walz and Senator J.D. Vance. I am Mike Church, your host here tonight. Thanks for joining us. You can contribute to our ongoing efforts broadcasting all of these events publicly and at our own expense by making a donation tonight in any kind at crusadechannel.com/donate or clicking that little dollar symbol down in the bottom of the chat at the YouTube at Crusade Radio Network. Same deal on the Rumble. You can also subscribe to the YouTube channel and the Rumble channel and boost our fortunes there. Mr. Barrett, if I was a boxing judge, if I was Carlos Padilla scores the bout thus far after 6 rounds for the contender J.D. Vance, 74, and for the reigning, I guess he's kind of the incumbent, Tim Walz, 67, Vance. I have this decidedly going for J.D. Vance.
Oh, it's absolutely it's no question. We saw this and we predicted this, and you brought it up and I brought it up. J.D. Vance has been ready for this. He did 50 plus. You said 54. He's done over 50 interviews, and they're all on adversarial talk shows, CNN, Face the Half Court Press. He is built for this moment. And you saw the fact that 5 seconds into the debate, Walz realized how the deep end of the pool really is, because he just didn't have any confidence. And I think if people are watching this, even if they don't understand the policies, Mike, and even if they don't care about any of this, people who just want to watch it just to kind of be around the water cooler tomorrow.
Right.
One guy looks like he knows what he's talking about, and the other guy literally looks like he got called for a book report and only watched the movie. And so it doesn't really matter what the policy points are being driven. The posture, the confidence, the fact that J.D. Vance fact-checked 3 people within a minute, and that so badly they had to cut off his mic, is a pretty damning statement to the 2 Karen moderators who were laughably just flailing around in this.
Well, they couldn't bring themselves. Where's the fact check on Amber Thurman? Amber Thurman is dead because of the carelessness and the recklessness of a Planned Parenthood clinic.
Mm-hmm.
She was carrying twins. They decided that they were going to go ahead and give her a mifepristone, and they shouldn't have. And when it began to work and do what it was supposed to do, with unintended complications, if you will, there was really nothing that could be done to save her life. And it was because of the mifepristone, which was prescribed at a Planned Parenthood clinic. It wouldn't have mattered. It wouldn't have mattered. The day she decided that she was going to kill the babies is the day she got the pills. It wasn't like that she was held in some Georgia prison and then they let her out and then she scampered across the border. That's not the way it happened at all. But I can tell you this, just watching the answers here, even if he didn't prep, J.D. Vance is holding, I think, the people's attention and is getting the better of Tim Walz. He might even be winning Tim Walz over to his side on some questions, which is really weird. Back to the debate, Richard.
Of death for children and teens in America is by far.
Here on the Crusade Radio Network, live talking campaign radio the way it should be, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at crusadechannel.com.
You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s. So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years. Parents responsible. I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have to do better. And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just, how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartels. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago. But what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids? And I think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan solutions for how to do that.
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think all the parents watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we've enacted enhanced red flag laws, enhanced background checks, and we can start to get data. But here's the problem. If we really want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just live with it, and here's what I do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that worked. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go? When we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills. They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms, and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said, actually, about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly, weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland. Is, okay, first of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse, or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was an NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety. I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention on this is, talking about cities and where it's at, the number one where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues, making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the guns, and there are things that you can do about it. But I do think that this is one, and I think this is a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Gentlemen, thank you. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. Let's turn now to the top contributor to inflation, the high cost of housing and rent. There's a shortage of more than 4 million homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No, it's not handing out. First, let me say this issue of housing, and I think those of you listening on this, the problem we've had is that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought up, it can be shifted, it can be moved around. Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the Vice President is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now, look, you're going to pay it back, and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we've put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance. We get it back from people because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in, but we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim. 25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable. Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately change the equation for American citizens if you lower energy prices? As Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill. One of the biggest drivers of housing costs, aside from illegal immigration, is, think about it. If a truck driver's paying 40% more for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build the house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods, too.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer?
Can I have it?
Where, yeah. Governor, we will get to you in a moment. But, Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Well, what Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening up building in this country. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, I do want to let you respond to the allegation that the vice president is letting in
Well, of course, that's not true. And again, you have the facts. I guess we agreed not to fact check. I'll check it. That, look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's, again, blaming and not trying to find the solution. I was going to ask, though, on this question, are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the countries we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like, there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make some investments. That gets people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. Economists, Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor, your time is up. But Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify. There are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly have a federal administration that makes it harder to develop our resources, makes it harder to build things, and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly as Kamala Harris says they have to do. And what that means is that you have a lot of people who would love to build homes who aren't able to build homes. I actually agree with Tim Walz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity. But the thing that has most turned housing into a commodity is giving it away to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the federal regulations? I deal with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that in some cases, many of those are local, many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you. Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, "I have concepts of a plan." Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of I believe private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time under Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. Look, it's very simple common sense. I think as Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress, you're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%. He introduced pricing transparency. Think about healthcare. You go into a hospital, you try to buy something, and nobody knows what it actually costs. That price transparency will actually give American consumers a little bit more choice and will also drive down costs. And we talked about, the reinsurance is what I was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along. And I think this is an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump has ever said or ever done, but when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and health care costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do, but I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better health care policies. He's earned it because he did it successfully the first time.
Governor?
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley, 3M, Medtronic, all of those. We understand healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris, more people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to. Go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court. And he would have repealed the ACA had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill. Now, fast forward, what that means to you is you lose your pre-existing conditions. If you're sitting at home and you got asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones that'll be there. But look, this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I've got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure, because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They figure they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris will protect and enhance the ACA.
Governor, thank you. Senator, you have not yet explained how you would protect people with pre-existing conditions or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Now, what Governor Walz just said is actually not true. A lot of what happened, and the reason that Obamacare was crushing under its own weight, is that a lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president. Inflation was low. Take-home pay was higher. And he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And the question about this of young people or whatever, that's the individual mandate piece of this. And Republicans fought tooth and nail saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then what happens is...
So you think the individual mandate's a good idea?
You shrink. I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect it to be there. And when we are able to make it, and we are making it this way, when we incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there, and we make sure then when you get sick and old, it's there for you. Because I heard people say, well, I don't want to buy into Medicare or whatever. Good luck buying health care once you get past 70. So look, the ACA works. We can continue to do better. Kamala Harris did that. The way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs on Medicare for the first time in American history.
Thank you. Margaret?
Can I address that?
I apologize. We're out of time. We have a number of subjects to discuss. Margaret?
Let's talk about families in America. There is a child care crisis in this country, and the United States is one of the very few developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you've said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress works. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies provide paid family and medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family and medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start, the family works better, we stay in their employers, we get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the issue, those big companies are able to offer it. Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some cases, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business and then to make sure that folks are able to pay for that. We were able to do it in Minnesota, and I'm still telling you this. We were listed as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A federal program of paid family and medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, do you support a national paid leave program? And if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they are home taking care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats, too, have worked on this issue. And I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who is an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator. And I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company. But the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program that spends a lot of money from the federal government. These programs only go to one kind of child care model. Let's say you'd like your church maybe to help you out with child care. Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide child care in the way that makes the most sense. You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote child care because, look, it is unacceptable. And, you know, of course, Tim and I have been on the campaign trail a lot the past 7 or 8 weeks. And one of the biggest complaints I hear from young families is people who feel like they don't have options, like they're choosing between going to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible burden to put on American families. We're the only country that does it. I think we could do a heck of a lot better.
Senator, thank you. You have also said, Senator Vance, many things about the American family. The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on child care as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said, as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. Is President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American workers. It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan. Cut taxes for American workers and American families. Cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal. And I think what President Trump is saying is that when we bring in this additional revenue with higher economic growth, we're going to be able to provide paid family leave, child care options that are viable and workable for a lot of American families.
Can you clarify how that will solve the child care shortage?
Well, because as Tim said, a lot of the child care shortage is we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide child care options for American families, because the reason it's so expensive right now is because you've got way too few people providing this very essential service.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, your ticket also has some child care tax credit proposals. Do you think Congress will agree to the $6,000 credit for newborns and $3,000 credit for children over the age of 6, as your campaign has promised? Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's $5,000 or $6,000, that pays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarships types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you asked is, you're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another $4,000 on the family and taking less. So not only do they not get the money to pay for that, they're $4,000 in the hole. That's Wharton School. That's his alma mater. And so I think the issue here is, those members of Congress, I can't believe they're not. When I go to businesses, sure, they'll talk about taxes sometime, but they will lead with child care and they will lead with housing, because we know the problem is, especially in a state like Minnesota, we need more workers because our economy is growing, but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need to move on. Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy and inflation. After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting the results. Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and other Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to figure out how to solve the inflation crisis caused by Kamala Harris's policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020, and my own belief is that we should fight about those issues, debate those issues peacefully in the public square, and that's all I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president. Donald Trump left the White House. And now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration. I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by two lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. And of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue, but we're united behind a basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues. And that, to me, is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here, and I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator.
Me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this, and the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he didn't. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day, some with the American flag, several later died. And it wasn't just in there. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state capitol grounds in St. Paul and said, we're marching to the governor's residence and there may be casualties. The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police. That issue, and Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting, hang Mike Pence. Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over. I worked with kids long enough to know, and I said as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. People hear that. So I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened on January 6th, the first time in American history that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power. And here we are 4 years later in the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our country apart.
Margaret?
Senator Vance, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim, first of all, it's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We are going to shake hands after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time. And if we want to say that we need to respect the results of the election, I'm on board. But if we want to say, as Tim Walz is saying, that this is just a problem that Republicans have had, I don't buy that.
Governor.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. And I think a revisionist history on this. Look, I don't understand how we got to this point. But the issue was that happened. Donald Trump can do it. And all of us say there's no place for this. It has massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill someone, threatening to do something, that's not censorship. Censorship is book banning. We've seen that. We've seen that brought up. I just think for everyone tonight, and I'm going to thank Senator Vance. I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement. But this is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't wear masks.
Senator, the governor does have the floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to respond to you.
Yeah. Well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this, I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is, where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So, America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with both of our candidates. The CBS News vice presidential debate continues.
Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's Mike Church here with you and with Richard Barrett, here watching the vice presidential debate here on the Crusade Radio Network. Again, our services and our efforts here are provided at the whim of the donations that we were able to raise during these great events here. You can make a donation one time or sign up for a recurring one at crusadechannel.com/donate, or click the $ symbol in the chat at YouTube at Crusade Radio Network. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. These big debates and these big events are a great way for us to recruit new listeners and new subscribers to all of our radio shows, including my show, every weekday morning, 6 to 9 a.m. Mr. Barrett, I anticipate that they will come back and maybe one more question and then a closing statement. I thought I saw that this was supposed to be 90 minutes. We're at the 100-minute mark right now, 100. But I wish to say to the audience that is tuning in and is listening out there that I started watching and covering and broadcasting these things in 1992. And of all the debates that I've seen, this is the 9th campaign. I think that, and this is, I will explain this after the debate in a little bit greater detail. I think that this may actually be a decent, substantive, real debate, Richard.
Yes, and one of the things that I'm seeing, and I know you're seeing right now on social media and our chat room and others, is that it's kind of boring. That Walz, that Vance should be, taking out Walz at every single moment. I think it's a very measured plan by JD Vance to present as a member of the ticket with Trump an opposing view. Trump is bombastic. Trump yells. Trump cuts people off. Vance is trying to show people who are uncertain about Trump, listen, I'm calm. These are my things that I do. I'm very, nothing gets me phased. I can debate 3 people at once. The boring in this case is the game plan, and he's executing it to a T. And it's absolutely this should be for any Republican or anybody who wants to get into politics, Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian, from the ground up, from the mayor's office up. This is how you debate. Confident, know your stuff, and don't get and don't give into emotion.
And don't be goaded into going demagogue.
Exactly.
Stick to the game plan, stick to the facts, stick to the actual the things that are provable, and maybe even stick to the if you will, the enemy or the opposition's weakness. This has been a master course by J.D. Vance. Actually has Tim Walz agreeing with him. And it's a technique that he's using. Well, let me talk about that, Tim, because I actually think I agree with one of the things that Tim said. Well, you know what, Margaret? I think that, let me answer your question. Before I answer your question, though, Margaret, let me say that I think that the American people deserve an answer on something that was said previously. He is teaching a master course in debate and in public oratory skills. Respect your opponent, right? Respect your opponent. Even when they don't respect you, go back. Respect your opponent. Respect what they have to say, and if you can oppose it or demolish it or whatever you wish, do it respectfully and with dignity. Yeah. Dignify your opponent and dignify add dignity to the event here. Because I can tell you, if it was Trump on that stage with Walz, it would already have been a brawl.
And I think that's a great point you bring up. And you need
hang on,
somebody
Richard, because
like
we're at the final.
Okay.
We'll come back and we'll talk about
It
it.
is now time for the closing statement. Senator Vance won the virtual coin toss and elected to go last. So, Governor Walz, you are first. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Senator Vance. Thank you to CBS News. And most importantly, thank you to all of you. If you're still up and the folks who miss Dancing with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the support of the democracy matters. It matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift, and a whole bunch of folks in between there. And they don't all agree on everything, but they are truly optimistic people. They believe in a positive future of this country and one where our politics can be better than it is. And I have to tell you, that better than it is the sense of optimism that there can be an opportunity economy that works for everyone, not just to get by, but to get ahead. And the idea that freedom really means something. Not the freedom of government to be in your bedroom or exam room, but the freedom for you to make choices about yourself. Now, look, we all know who Donald Trump is. He's told us, and as Maya Angelou said, believe him when he told you that. His first inaugural address talked about American carnage, and then he spent 4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said, Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive. I humbly ask for your vote on November 5th for Kamala Harris.
Governor Walz, thank you. Senator Vance, your closing statement.
Well, I want to thank Governor Walz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that, too, has gotten harder with because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
Senator Vance, thank you. And thank you both for participating in the only vice presidential debate of this election cycle. I'm Margaret Brennan.
And I'm Nora O'Donnell. And a reminder, there are just 35 days until Election Day. Please get out and vote. And for all of us here at CBS News.
Okay, it's Mike Church here, host of the Mike Church Show here on the Crusade Radio Network. Weekday morning, 6 to 9 a.m. Hope you will join us. And we have now hosted, I believe, our last event of the 2024 campaign cycle, which began with the Iowa caucus in January. And we have been here for all of them with you, as I promised, on January the 8th of this year that we would. And we have covered this campaign from start to finish. And I'm so proud of our team, and also proud of the fact that we've pretty much covered every event and have made it through all the technical difficulties and challenges as an independent startup radio and television network. Thanking all of you that are watching us now on YouTube. We didn't come to the YouTube until May and are glad to be here now. And thanks to our YouTube audience, our Rumble audience, our audience on X.com, and our audience, of course, our beloved, paid, and longtime Crusader Founders Pass members at crusadechannel.com/chat in the chat room. And look forward to the next 35 days with you guys. Lots of great commentary tonight in the chat room. Let me just say or kind of touch upon what I said on Twitter, and that out of the 9 presidential campaigns that I've covered, I think this was the most substantial and intellectual debate that we've had. Not that Tim Walz is an intellectual heavyweight, and not that Nora O'Donnell and whoever that other woman was did a great job. They kind of got the conversation started and asked good questions. But you had a St. Thomas Aquinas on the stage who was humble enough to go like, okay, I am not going to demolish these people with superior intellect. Instead, I'm going to engage them. And J.D. Vance, America got a great glimpse of what may be the political leader of the future, and that's J.D. Vance. And if J.D. Vance is the political leader of the future, tonight we got a great lesson in scandal. He refused to scandalize. You guys that wanted Vance, Richard, let me bring Richard in, that you wanted Vance to just destroy or whatever it is that you wanted him to do to Tim Walz. He wasn't going to scandalize the man. He wasn't going to have to answer to God for perpetrating the scandal, when instead he could just defeat him or attempt to defeat him with the honesty and the truth of the arguments and the justice of the counter arguments and things. This was an absolutely stunning performance by Senator Vance, Richard. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this in 33 years of covering politics. Maybe I've seen it from people that aren't politicians and have given lectures or maybe have had little debates on stages twixt themselves. But I've never seen anything like this in electoral politics, ever, in 33 years. Let me one-up myself. Let's go back to 1980, my first presidential campaign, when I watched the Carter-Reagan debates, and even a debate that had John Anderson, the independent candidate, in it. Never seen anything like what was done tonight. And I think J.D. Vance made all of them better performers. You?
I have to agree with you on that. And it was a masterclass, as we've said before. And I think he was the perfect candidate for the moment, because he was disciplined, because Walz was all over the place. He was lying and babbling, and you have to give Walz credit. He didn't take the bait on a lot of those things. He fact-checked a couple. He was strategic in when he did it, but he stayed on topic, stayed on message, and remained calm. And I think that was the biggest takeaway, especially early on. We all noticed that Walz did not want to be there. I mean, he did calm down eventually after they gave him a lot of the longest topic they spent on was abortion. That's where he really got his feet, under him, because they gave him a lot of time there. But Vance, he took every, could he have been better on the gun issue? I think so. But for him, he has to navigate the two issues that the Democrats are trying to run on: guns and abortion. He's got to pretty much go to he's got to push. He's got to push on those two issues. We may not like a lot of the answers, but he can't say anything that gets him in a lot of trouble or puts Trump on a different plane. He got through those two issues as best as one could. And once again, the absolute presence and the introduction J.D. Vance has been just given, or we'll just say given to the union, to the people that could be potentially voting for him. And the last thing I'll stop babbling around here is we live in a presidential campaign that is decided on clips and viral moments. J.D. Vance had all the viral moments tonight.
Everything.
Whether it was the head nod to the side, like breaking the fourth wall, or fact checking the moderators into not fact checking again. I don't think they fact checked again after he fact checked them into them muting him. He had all the moments, and that's for a short attention span and ADD union, that's really the most important part there. He didn't give the Democrats any ammunition.
Agreed. Now, I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to shock people, this is my takeaway from this debate, biggest takeaway. I am more comfortable with a Walz-Harris ticket after tonight than I would have been before, Richard. I think that Senator Vance made Governor Walz civil. He made him act and talk like a governor, which is a good thing. He made him draw upon his experience in Congress and as a governor, which was a good thing. And I suppose for the people of Minnesota, they happen to fancy Richard, that they have been stuck with, or maybe it's a Huey Lewis in the new song, I am happy to be stuck with you. They have been stuck with, or maybe happy to be stuck with, Tim Walz as their congressman and their governor for he's in his second term now. So they reelected him, so they must have been at least somewhat happy with him. And I think that after tonight, that J.D. Vance, with his civility and with his humility, and his attempt to be a comrade in arms, if you will, or at least a brother in arms in a common battle, because he kept extending. I think Tim and I actually agree on this. I mean, the line that kept coming up, this was just masterful. And I tell you, I am more at ease with Tim Walz than I was before, and more. And I'm watching Walz going like, dude, is this where you? Is this what you want them to put on your tombstone and your pizza? That you were the hack that had to apologize for Kamala Harris? Because I can't point to an actual moment, but there was some brinksmanship and some salesmanship in some of what Walz said that was completely and totally insincere, Richard. Did you pick up on that? He was saying it because he was told to say it's a good line. He memorized it, but he didn't really think it, and he didn't really mean it. And I think J.D. Vance dragged that out of him.
Yeah, that was the early part where he was most nervous, is when he was reciting the Trump bad talking points. Remember, Walz and Trump have had conversations, especially during 2020. So they have a relationship, and you know more than anybody else the art of the deal. Anybody who spends a couple minutes with Trump, even if they disagree with him vehemently, they like him. He's a hard guy not to like if you've ever had the pleasure of having a one-on-one conversation with him. So the fact that he had to repeat well, Trump is bad and Trump is this and Trump is that, that was where he was really stuttering and really uncomfortable. Once he was out, are his points terrible? Yes. But there's at least, comparing him to his running mate, to Kamala, there's no substance there.
No.
There's at least a smidgen, and I will say smidgen, there's not a lot. There's at least a smidgen of competency behind what Walz is saying. Yeah, he stumbles and he sounds like Homer Simpson, but when he's on a topic he agrees with, climate change, abortion, guns, stuff like that, he at least can make the case, even if it's not very well.
I want to say this, and I'm reading it in our chat room, and I appreciate all of you guys' comments. Clark says, please don't let Walz's lies schmooze over the fact that he's one of the biggest Marxist scumbags in office today. Guys, I don't disagree with you. I'm not selling out and saying I'm voting for Harris and Walz. I'm simply saying that J.D. Vance civilized that debate and made it a gentlemanly discourse between two guys and two women that were trying to play moderators. That's all I'm saying. And they actually had, because of Vance's answers, they had substantive points that they had to respond to. It wasn't just fluff. I mean, there was some fluff and some sloganeering in there, but they had substantive points to respond to. And I'll also say this. Imagine a Vice President Vance and a Governor Walz. Do you think the chance is better now that Governor Walz said, Governor, Vice President Vance on the phone for you, wants to talk to you about that bill that you have or that's in the legislature about mutilating children or whatever? You want me to tell him that you're out? No, I'll take his call. I'll talk to JD. I think J.D. Vance made it possible that you can actually have a bridge between. I don't know that we ever resolve our differences between little r Republicans and Marxists, but if it's possible, J.D. Vance made it possible tonight. And I think that that's my big takeaway. Magdalene Rose, our political affairs correspondent on our Dude Maker hotline here with us. Magdalene, how did you see this tonight? J.D. Vance, obviously a clear winner.
Absolutely. And what I think is interesting is that Vance somehow got Tim Walz to agree with him every other question. And at times it was almost like, does Tim Walz know that he is the Democrat on that stage? What was really cool was that J.D. Vance was able to bring out Walz's inner sort of Midwest conservative guy thing that a lot of people like him have, but that they suppress to do business in the ultra-liberal world. And Vance drew that out of him. You saw when they were talking about manufacturing, Walz wanted to agree even more with him. So there is a lot of wiggle room there. And I think that the biggest problem they're going to have after this debate is the hard left is going to be upset with Walz for not being the hard left candidate they thought he was.
Yes, Richard, I completely agree with that. Walz was almost trying to moderate himself and make Harris seem moderate.
Magdalene absolutely knocks it out of the park on that one. That now Walz is going to have to pivot back on the campaign trail to try and make up for the fact that he was so outclassed that the only thing he could do was agree, because he didn't have the ability to actually debate these points. And so it's going to, the distrust and the phone call he's probably getting, not from Harris. Harris is probably already asleep, but one of Harris's advisors saying, I can't believe you let JD dog walk you that entire for 90 minutes. You made us look bad. We picked you. You're supposed to have our back, blah, 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 blah. And you're, the mistrust between the two is only going to get better or wider. And the problem is that Walz was brought in to be her lapdog, to be, Kamala's great, Kamala's this, and allowing JD to civilize the debate. Because one thing that, and you brought this up, Mike, one thing that Harris has done and the Democrats have done is, and you played the soundbite before the actual start of the debate, Trump is a threat. Trump is a threat. Trump is a threat. Democracy is in danger. Now, with JD civilizing that ticket and making it just two people talking about issues, now people are going, well, is JD Vance is the running mate to Trump. They can't be this is not the monster that
it can't be that bad.
So that is a huge flub on Walz's part. He did not continue the key point, which was, and they tried to do it with the January 6th thing, but he's just not skilled enough to do it. But that they could not maintain that pivotal talking point that if you put Trump back in office, Hitler 2.0 will be there and we're all going to die, because the fear mongering is the only thing they have to drag people out. Like when they try to do with Project 2025's registry of abortions, which is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. But stuff like that, he tried to hit on, he tried to do the fear stuff, but JD once again calmly redirected it back to the issues, and that was his biggest strength tonight, is not dog chasing every single lie and getting into screaming matches, because then they could have played those clips on Twitter and Facebook being like, look at JD, he's just as rabid as Trump, he's just as bad as Trump.
Exactly.
And so that is a huge failure on Walz's part and a huge win for JD.
No, I completely agree that JD Vance is the sober and the calm one of the two. But I extend this to all of our friends that are just tuning in for the first time. I've covered 9 of these presidential election cycles. I've covered all 9 of the debates, vice presidential debates. I've seen them all. This one is, and the masterclass that J.D. Vance conducted tonight in dignified oratory combat. Let's go with that. Dignified oratory combat was a masterclass. They will be studying this. If there was a West Point University for oratory or for speaking skills, they would be studying this like they studied Stonewall Jackson's pincher move. It was that good. And Vance started by, right at the outset, Magdalene, he humanized himself. He said, well, you know what, Margaret, I'm going to answer your question. But first, I would like to tell the American people a little bit about me. Because you know what? Many Americans may not know me or Governor Walz. And this debate is a chance for us to introduce ourselves. So let me tell you where I came from. And he nuked, he destroyed any chance that Walz was going to bring in the Harris tried and true. When I was born, I grew up in a middle class family, and I worked at McDonald's, and I was middle class in a middle class family, but then I mentioned that I was middle class. He stole it. Magdalene, in the first 90 seconds, he probably stole the entire playbook from them, which was keep repeating your middle class, keep repeating your middle class. Trump's a billionaire. J.D. Vance worked with Peter Thiel from PayPal. He's a millionaire. Just keep. They're evil, bad people. They have a lot of money. Vance just in a stroke of pure brilliance and genius, just absolutely eviscerated that talking point, took it off the table. It was like a Stratigo board, just like taking your hand and just wiping the whole slate clean. The whole debate changed in the first 90 seconds, and Walz never recovered. He was like he was J.D. Vance's old debate partner, or maybe J.D. was his son, and he was helping to coach the son through debate class in college. It was almost collegial at points. That's how good it was. So anyone that had any doubts about J.D. Vance, I will accept your apologies in the form of a $100 donation to the Crusade Radio Network. All of you that mocked me and made fun of me and said I didn't know what the hell I was talking about, and that Vance was an empty suit and he wasn't this and he wasn't that. Brother, where's Hulk Hogan when we need him, Richard? This was the J.D. Vance coming out party. The future of the Republican Party is bright, and the bulb that shines the brightest is one J.D. Vance, soon to be vice president, I think, Magdalene.
It definitely is. And what I thought was so great was that Tim Walz was getting into this position of not only agreeing with J.D. Vance on things, but he was having to burst the bubble that Joe Biden has not presided over the destruction of manufacturing. And Vance did a very smart thing. He talked about things going back to 2015, because that is always the area of time that Democrats bring up where he was critical of Trump and all of that. So by going back, by talking about the Iran nuclear deal and manufacturing decisions and those kinds of things, he shifted the narrative away from his comments in that time period and instead made the focus on the failure of Democrats in that time period. The redirect, it was a masterclass in it. And this is really the debater that young conservatives have been waiting for within the Republican Party. This is what we can produce when we put our best foot forward, when we push forward the right young people. This is what young conservatives have the potential to turn into. There is no young leftist politician in the country who could do what J.D. Vance just did. The closest you'd get is Pete Buttigieg. And at the end of the day, he's a terrible transportation secretary. So what Vance did is a knockout. This is the best hiring decision Trump has made since entering politics. And what I think is so great is I didn't even really think about Trump that much during this debate. To me, this was almost one policy set versus another. It wasn't a debate about Donald Trump, which is enormously beneficial for Republicans.
I completely agree. And I'd also like to say that I think Governor Walz, I have a lot of respect for Governor Walz. I think Governor Walz did very well tonight, Magdalene. There were moments where he wanted to go demagogue, and he did. He told a couple of lies. But I could see that he was going like, man, why am I on this stage opposing this dude? There were at least a half a dozen times, well, I agree with Senator Vance. Senator Vance and I have common ground here. This is what a debate and a conversation is supposed to be. They both did a great service. Richard, can you bring Richard on and Magdalene at the same time? Would you say that tonight a good service was done for the American people? I would say that tonight a good thing was done. And it was done at the instigation, I think, primarily of J.D. Vance. But Governor Walz did not have to go along with it. But I think primarily, for the most part, he did. Guys, gals?
Matt, you
yeah,
want to
I
go
think
first?
he did. Yeah, I think he did. And I think what was great was that Vance was able to show that Walz is a Midwest governor. He is not a hard leftist. So the hard leftists who pin their hopes on Walz, I think they were mistaken. They may have been better off with Josh Shapiro if this is how Walz is going to handle politics.
He did not come out as a hard leftist and tried to avoid even admitting that he was. Richard?
I think what I can see is that America, the union, is very wary of politics right now, and I think debates like this is a nice step in the direction of repairing trust in the American political system.
I agree.
It's not a total it's not a total fix, but it's a step in the right direction. It's the first debate we've had. 2016 we didn't have this. Maybe the one where Hillary and Trump walked around, they were able to stand. That one was all right. But this is the first one that we've had in a long time where the other side was not painted as the devil incarnate that needs to be utterly destroyed, and that we were really just having a policy debate as two members of the American Union could have. So, yeah, I think it's nice to see, and it's a nice step in the direction of repairing and bringing back the idea of civility in an election cycle where, especially when an election cycle and one presidential candidate's been shot and almost killed another time. So it's even more important that both of these guys take the temperature in the room down.
No, I agree with that. And I would also like to say to our audience listening out there on the Crusade Radio Network, if you were listening to this, I got a text message from a friend who was listening, and he texted me and he said, KingDude, great listening. This is really, really riveting. So remember, people that listened to the Kennedy-Nixon debate thought that Nixon won. People that watched the debate thought that Kennedy won because he was taller than Nixon and because of his stature. Another point that I would like to make is that I think that the moderators may have had some fact-checking ill intentions going in. And I think that by the 35, 40-minute mark, Magdalene, a little bit towards the first halfway mark, I think that there was a change of heart, and that if they had fact checkers, that they invoked the fact checkers twice that I counted, that there were some IFB conversation about dial down to fact checkers. Let them talk, dial down to fact checkers. They didn't want Nora O'Donnell and Margaret playing the role of who's running for the office or who it is that is delivering the opinions. Instead, they pretty much, I didn't like either one of them, so don't get me wrong, and I wouldn't have done it that way, but there was a point in the debate where I think that both of them pretty much, there was one snooty part where they went, we have a lot to get to, Senator Vance, we got to cut your mic off. I think was probably the high water mark of the ridiculousness. Other than that, there was a point during the debate where CBS News, someone and there was a trailer there with 90 people in it, many different cameras, all with headsets on, talking to one another. There's one or two directors there. Somebody in the director's chair said, "Let them talk. Let them talk." Called down or stood down a little junior league fact checker, a little single cat lady fact checker, and went, "Stand down," because they were all probably yelping, "Senator Vance got this," and told them to stand down because they did do an awful lot of fact checking. Credit to CBS. They're not at least disgraced and embarrassed as ABC was, and will remain eternally after that after the Harris-Trump debate.
And I think one of the reasons for that is because Vance is not going to back down. For a very long time, moderators have been dealing with debaters in the Republican Party who are knowledgeable, but they're not masterclass debaters, like Barrett has said. They're not these knockout guys. This is a different game with J.D. Vance. This is not a man who prepped a little bit. This is an Olympic sport for him. And this is the difference here. When he went back and forth, but I think that it was Margaret, saying, that's just ridiculous about one of the questions. He won that altercation. He debated against the moderator and won, to the point where Tim Walz didn't even say anything because he didn't want to get involved. And once that happened, there was a shift. I don't know if they shifted the questions they were going to ask, or if they shifted just the vibe in general, but they knew that J.D. Vance is somebody who will stop a debate, walk off stage, and say this is unfair. And the reason why he can do that is because he operates with Donald Trump at the head of the ticket, and Trump doesn't care what you do as long as you uphold what he's told you and make him look good. Trump will stop a debate and walk off stage. He's done things like that in the past. So J.D. Vance went into it knowing he could do whatever he wanted. He didn't have to do that, But those moderators knew they were in danger of losing him on that stage, and they course corrected.
Yeah, it was so good for so many reasons, and I'm so happy that we covered it here, and proud that we covered it here on the Crusade Radio Network. Frank Luntz, the famous pollster, scores the ballot final focus group tonight on the after the VP debate, 12-2 in favor of J.D. Vance. I also like this comment. I misjudged J.D. Vance. He is a really good communicator and a great debater. Frank Luntz said that, and he also said, and Tim Walz has given viewers more details about policies tonight than his running mate has all year. Donald Trump Jr. is speaking now.
That are sort of put out, by life. He was more comfortable in the awkward spots than most of our guys are on the no-brainers. And, I mean, I think the rest of America saw that tonight.
Vance was evasive when asked about supporting Israel launching a preemptive military strike against Iran. What should the response be?
I mean, you can ask JD and you can ask my father. I'm not going to talk the details of policy, but obviously Israel should be able to defend itself. I mean, you have...
Okay, Magdalene and Richard. Maggie, what's your take? You think JD won? Yeah. Magdalene and Richard, I think that, and Richard, I want to specifically talk to you and throw this question to you, because you and I have been talking about this for, what, 6 years now. The Trump mystique. You know what I think about it, and you know what the question is probably already before I even throw it to you. This shows again when Donald Trump is in his element and actually has the time to choose people to do the things that he needs them to do. He's not the great doer so much as he is the great diviner of talent. He knows people. He can sense that, okay, I think that guy could do that job. This was the greatest hiring decision, Magdalene, you said it, in the history of Trump International. If he is to become POTUS for the second time out of 3 runs, and how many people had so many reservations about JD? And Richard, I know you do, and I agree with you on the points that you have reservations about him. And we don't live in a perfect world. We don't get everything that we want. Trump has proven he's learned. He knows a lot more about this game of politics. He's going to pick the right people this time, I think, or at least pick more of the right people. And the choice of Vance, that is a game changer that is going to win him the White House. If there was any doubt about anyone was going to vote for Trump Vance tonight, it was resolved. And again, I think that Tim Walz did himself a credit. I think he was a good debater. He was a demagogue at times. And I agree with Frank Luntz. Tim Walz knows more about the Walz-Harris campaign platform, if there is one, than Kamala Harris has ever known. And he made a better case for it without rolling his eyes. Magdalene, the optics of this, he didn't have to roll his eyes. He didn't have to smirk at Vance. He made his points. He made his comebacks without all the histrionics. And if we're going to have this ticket, it ought to be Walz has at least been elected and done things. It ought to be Walz-Harris.
She's not there anymore.
Oh, she's gone. Okay, well, Richard, you're going to have to answer that question then.
Completely correct in all facets of that. Well, the fact of the matter is that Walz is for whatever you want to call him, doofy, Don Rickles, whatever the case may be, he's at least been in government. So he can sense in some way, shape, or form formulate a policy. That's fine. You kind of just learn that by osmosis. You know, even an idiot congressman, if they spend enough time in Congress, they'll be able to at least repeat the basic points of a plan.
Sure.
And as far as JD, you can forgive Trump in the first term. In a situation like we all would. He went into a situation that he had no idea, which is politics, which is a completely different field. He tried to use his instincts. Some were good, a lot were not. And so now that he has experience, he's able to see through some. Because remember, I was the guy who said he should have picked Rubio. I was a guy who defended and made 200,000 cases for Rubio. Obviously, I think Rubio would not have been as good of a pick as JD. I did not like the JD Vance pick, but after tonight, I can see why Trump picked him. And so that you see now that there's experience under his belt, that Trump is using the skills he acquired in business and applying them to, hiring the best people. As he said in 2016, I think he would actually be able to do a better job of it in 2024.
I don't want to say this, but I will say it. I'm almost bearish on America again with Trump at the head as president and Vance there. But there are so many, such a myriad of problems. I wouldn't want to inherit this. And I think that the remedy is going to be great pain. The idea that we get out of this without suffering, all suffering together, I think is ridiculous. We have allowed our leaders to run up a $238 trillion unfunded liability, $37 trillion in real debt on the credit card, and a situation where we have imported nearly a quarter of the Latin American criminal world. Those are things that are not easily undone. And it's difficult to see how can you undo those things. I don't know, but I do know this: if it can be done, well, then you're going to need strong leadership, very strong leadership, and I don't mean like Nazi dictatorial. I mean strong, good leadership. Well, at least in one half of that leadership team tonight, I think we saw in J.D. Vance, thoughtful, very well reasoned and very well formed, a man who I think is coming into his own, and I don't think that Nora O'Donnell or Margaret, whatever her name was, or that Governor Tim Walz walked off that stage with enmity in their hearts for J.D. Vance, or anything other than that was a pretty good gig. That was pretty good. We should do more of this. And I think that with a guy like J.D. Vance, if you can get people to sit down and actually talk about things, maybe you can resolve. Maybe you actually can convert people from evil ways of thinking to good ways. Tom McClure says in our chat room that he's been praying at abortion clinics for 6 years and he's never seen a convert. You may have never seen one the day that you were praying there, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't one, Todd, somewhere down the line. So, hope springs eternal, Mr. Barrett. Final comments, and then we're going to sign off.
Perfect. If you're Republican, if you're Trump, if you're MAGA, you couldn't have asked for a better night. And I agree with you. If you're Harris, it could have been a lot worse. You take whatever ones you can. Very good debate. And we'll see how it affects the campaign going forward.
I agree with all that. And thanks to Richard and Magdalene and Maggie, our producer, and all of you for watching. Because if you don't watch, there's no sense in doing the broadcast. If you want to support us and continue to tune in, we'll be here tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. I have confirmed Mark Morano of ClimateDepot.com will be my special guest at 7:06 a.m. tomorrow morning Central Time. We're going to find out whether or not hurricanes actually are more powerful than they have ever been, and that climate change is the cause, because Mark Morano is the authority. So join me tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. for the Mike Church Show on the Crusade Radio Network. For all of us here on the Crusade Radio Network, it has been our pleasure and our duty and our honor to bring to you all of the events of Campaign 2024. Of course, we're not done, because we have 34 days until Election Day, and we will be here with you for every single day. If there is another debate, if there's another meeting, if there's another, heaven forbid, another safety event or whatever, when news breaks out, we break in, and we will continue to do so. Thanks for joining us tonight. For all of us here on the Crusade Radio Network, God bless you, Mary keep you, and God bless our candidates. Keep them all safe. See you tomorrow here on the Crusade Radio Network.